Hello and welcome to another game review. Today we're looking at Fearmonium, an indie Metroidvania developed and self-published by RedBlack Spade, who was kind enough to provide me with an early review copy. It's available on PC, Mac, and Linux and was released on May 20, 2021, which should be today as long as I don't have any technical issues. We'll be looking at what it does right, what it does wrong, and answering the quintessential question, is it worth your money? Now, if at any point you think I'm doing a good job, please consider leaving a like and subscribe if you find the content interesting. It really does help me as a creator. Also, Twitter and Discord links in the description. Alright, enough of that, let's get into it. First up, the technical bits. The system requirements are on screen now, and in case it's not immediately obvious, a potato could run this game. Basically, if your computer has a processor from the last decade, you'll probably be fine. I personally encountered no stutters, hitches, frame rate dips, or crashes. It ran perfectly smoothly at all times. The game was mostly bug-free, though there was one instance where I managed to get soft-locked because I somehow ended up standing in an area that should have been crouching only. While annoying, this only happened once in my entire time with the game. The one technical thing I will criticize is that you really don't have much in the way of display options. It's not a deal breaker, but I would have appreciated the ability to change the resolution or to increase or even outright disable the frame rate cap. That being said, overall, on a technical level, Fearmonium is very solid. On to visuals. Okay, so I know what a lot of you will be thinking right off the bat, so I'm going to address it right away. Fearmonium does indeed have a lot of stylistic similarities to Cuphead, though with an obviously more macabre tone and a darker color palette. That being said, I feel like I'd be doing both games a disservice by drawing too many parallels. While they both take stylistic beats from old 30s cartoons, I feel like Cuphead was trying to emulate that style, where Fearmonium went for more of an inspired by approach. And then of course, the formula was changed up a bit to give it this dark overtone that highlights the very serious story beats and themes of Fearmonium. I absolutely love the way this game looks. The foreground and background are visually distinct, each location has its own color themes that make them feel really unique, and the character design is just dripping with charm, and manages to walk that tightrope between creepy and cartoonish. Animations were overall very smooth as well. I always got the impression that everything was visually connected. And another thing that I have to point out is that each frame was individually drawn, mostly from scratch, which I think is absolutely incredible. I find that when developers really take their time with the art direction and put in the insane level of extra effort it takes to do this style of frame-by-frame animation, it really does elevate the final product, and oftentimes you'll find that games that are heavily praised for their art, like Grease for example, are the ones that did this. Overall, I think the visuals of Fearmonium are absolutely stellar. Music and sound. Now unfortunately, since the game hasn't released yet as of the making of this video, I haven't been able to get my hands on the music to put in the background, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. To greatly oversimplify it, the majority of the music of Fearmonium consists of synthesized instruments in a continual, creepy vamp. I know that sounds kinda dismissive, but I don't mean it that way. I get the sense that for most of your experience, the music is meant to be more of an atmospheric kind of deal, where it's really more meant to just immerse you in the world rather than something you're jamming out to. And I think it succeeded in that regard. Each in-game location's theme was distinct, the music kept things consistently creepy, and I definitely felt like it pulled me into the experience. The music does pick up a bit during boss fights. Ultimately, I felt like the boss themes were all certainly good and effective companions to the fights, but weren't particularly memorable. The exception would be the final boss's theme, which was jazzy and exciting, with a digital brass section that transitioned into this ominous piano melody that still maintained the same tempo and pounding drum backing of the jazzy section. Again, I really wish I could play it for you, but I couldn't get my hands on it and I can't show you a clip because spoilers. The sound design is also pretty decent, but I wouldn't say it's perfect. You of course have the general grunts and sound effects of your character's movement. Enemies typically have their own unique sound elements, my favorite being the arcade consoles, which make 8-bit blips and boops when they fire out their projectiles at you. I also like the doll enemies who have musical instruments. Whenever they fire out their musical notes, it audibly chimes and it adds to the overall atmosphere. There's technically voice acting, but it's only used as a sound effect, so grunts and other noises as opposed to dialogue. For what it is, I think it works, and I do appreciate that the voices that were picked actually matched the characters, which I think is important even if the dialogue itself was not voiced. The one criticism I do have of the sound is that the thwomp of hitting an enemy with your main attack lacks any real impact. It's not like it killed my enjoyment or anything, but it really just doesn't sound like a cartoon getting hit by a mallet to me. I probably wouldn't have even mentioned it if not for the fact that it's held up next to sound design that I otherwise really like, and the fact that it's one of the most frequent sounds you'll be hearing considering you're smacking shit up the entire time. But still, overall, the music and sound of Fearmonium definitely gets a pass from me, even though I wasn't blown away by any means. On to story. The premise of Fearmonium is really interesting. You're inside the mind of a teenage boy named Max. During an emotionally vulnerable moment, he kinda got freaked out by a clown. You are effectively a visualization of the memory of this clown, but you're not a clown, you're the entire circus. Your goal is to traverse into the depths of Max's psyche and evolve from that unsettling memory into full-on coulrophobia, the fear of clowns. With the help of Lady Depression, 3 guesses as to what her deal is, you have to destroy other parts of Max's psychological makeup. Interestingly, this doesn't only include things like his various psychological defense mechanisms, but you can also take on his other fears. I mean, the first boss is pediophobia, the fear of dolls. And later on, you even take on some of Max's objective fears, such as the bullies that regularly attack and extort him. The idea is that these alternative fears distract from his fear of clowns, so you need to dismantle these fears so you and Lady Depression are the ones truly in control. As you make progress, you'll get little story sections depicting what happens to Max. This is delivered in the style of comic panels. I really like these sections, though I'm not a huge fan of the character design here. Of course, that's purely a matter of personal taste, which is why I didn't discuss it in the visuals section of this review. These comic sections do an excellent job of showing the troubled life of Max, and you can really see where some of his hangups came from and why he's so susceptible to these negative influences. Furthermore, it all ties in really well with the things you've been doing all game. You see how breaking down his various fears and defense mechanisms opens himself up to an even deeper, more visceral fear of clowns, and how every little piece continues to beat him down and wail away at his psyche. You do feel for Max and his shitty situation, but there was also this morbid fascination that kept me totally engrossed and wanting to see what happens next, and how the next enemy would fuck with his head even more. Another thing I have to mention is the ending. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but one thing I have a tendency to harp on about in my videos is pacing. If I'm experiencing a story that I think is good and there's an issue with it, chances are it'll be a pacing issue. Pacing is just something that's hard to really get right, and a lot of otherwise great works suffer from pacing issues. Unfortunately, Fearmonium is no exception to that rule. For most of the game, there's a very steady, almost methodical pace to the story. Enter area, beat boss, Max slips further into his well of despair. But that's not something that can continue indefinitely. Eventually, they have to break that story loop and start moving towards a conclusion. Well, to me, that shift towards a conclusion all felt very abrupt, and while I actually really like how the story ends, I feel like there really wasn't enough build up to that actual moment. It's kinda hard to articulate what I'm thinking without spoilers, but think of it like this. Imagine that loop I was talking about of Max's continuing spiral into depression as an arc in a TV show that takes place over the course of a 10-episode season. Things are at their lowest, and the story is going to pick up again in Season 2, where it'll eventually come to a conclusion. Now imagine Season 2 is only 2 episodes long. It has to condense everything in the season into a short amount of time and wrap it all up. That's what the ending of Fearmonium felt like to me. And to be clear, it was a really good ending. I liked it a lot, I just didn't like how it got there. And the last thing I want to mention in this section is the localization. Fearmonium was almost entirely a one-man project with just about everything except for the music done by a man named Slava Gris. Now, he's a Russian guy who speaks conversational English, but from my email conversation with him and from checking out the Fearmonium devlog on YouTube, you can definitely tell that it's his second language. Fortunately, Fearmonium did receive a professional English localization, and I have to say, it's pretty damn good. There were a few awkward word choices and very minor grammatical issues here and there, but overall it was high quality. This is especially impressive because the story does go on about some of the science behind all the various things going on in Max's mind, and I mean medical terminology is the kind of thing that confuses even native speakers. I was definitely impressed by how natural and fluid the English was because I think proper localization is something that's far more important than many give it credit for. Also, poor localization is an issue I notice a lot in indie titles from foreign developers. I appreciate that care was taken to make Fearmonium more accessible to an English-speaking audience. Oh, and one more thing. This doesn't actually fit in any of the sections of this review, but I just have to mention it. The credits are fucking hilarious. Since Fearmonium is very close to a one-man project, the credits are mostly just Slava Gris doing fucking everything except for music, localization, text editing, and testing. He also has a section in his credits for the computer mouse he used to make all the art. I fucking love it. Okay, now finally on to gameplay. Fearmonium is a side-scrolling Metroidvania through and through. Explore a 2D world with branching pathways, unlock abilities that let you access previously blocked off pathways, continue until you reach the end. If you've ever played a Metroidvania before, the exploration should be very familiar to you. Just about every path has some sort of goodie at the end. Obviously, you're looking for the stuff that lets you progress, like a key to the boss room or a new ability. But there are also plenty of little upgrades scattered throughout, such as increased health or stamina. My favorite thing to collect was the item that gives you more attack power because holy damn is that useful in this game. There are these ghosts you can release which will make the bosses start out with reduced health. You can also find these birds that'll later allow you to unlock new shit. Not going into detail here because it's arguably a spoiler. Now here's the thing, the map is actually pretty damn big. Bigger than a lot of other Metroidvanias actually. I mean, just look at it. It's sure as hell bigger than Symphony of the Night, which was one of the inspirations for the whole ass genre. I'd say it's probably a little smaller than the map of Hollow Knight when you account for the differences in room size. There's a lot going on, and I found that I naturally ended up nearly 100%ing the game by the time I got to the final boss. Something about the level design just encourages you to explore every little corner of it, more so than most Metroidvanias in my experience, which is something I think is incredibly important for the genre. Exploration is the main driving force of a Metroidvania, and you're doing something right if you make it fun. That being said, Fearmonium does fall into a trap I see a lot of Metroidvanias fall into. Sometimes there were moments where I needed one specific thing in order to progress, but I had no idea where in the fuck it was, and as the map continued to expand, it got harder and harder to even see where the unexplored areas were, much less which one I had to go to. I think this could have been mitigated somewhat by adding a few icons to the map, namely one denoting an unexplored room and one for different types of obstacles that are blocking your path. There were plenty of times where I remembered coming across a restricted area, but I would forget what exactly was blocking it off. Then later, I would trudge back to that area with a shiny new ability only to realize that it was the wrong one. And towards the end of the game, the map was very tough to visually navigate. Here's a section I was stuck on for some time. I spent probably an hour or more running around trying to figure out what the hell I was missing. This was the map at the time. This is where I needed to go. I must have passed over that little section on the map a dozen times. It just got lost in the fog of all the other crap, and it was very frustrating to have it gating my progress, especially since I was so close to finishing. Still, the majority of the exploration was fun, though I do think it fell off at the very end. Now the combat. The combat is very melee-centric, with the majority of the damage you deal coming from your big-ass mallet. You got a simple 3-hit combo with the final hit dealing increased damage. You can also swing while in the air and swing upwards. You'll also unlock various abilities and items as you progress. Some of these exist purely for Metroidvania reasons, some are purely combat-focused. I'm gonna be honest with you. I didn't find most of these abilities and items to be very useful, or if I did, they were extremely niche. I mean, there's an ability where a clown will just poke out your back and damage anything right behind you, or one who will fire straight upwards, but they really don't do much damage. Usually they only hit about as hard as a single melee swipe, if that, so I found them not to be worth using at all. It kinda sucks to go through a gameplay section only for your reward to be useless. For most of the game, I only used a handful of abilities like the one that just automatically attacks enemies, effectively acting as a moderate DPS increase. Some of the abilities you get towards the very end of the game, and I'm talking like the last 20% of the game, are extremely powerful, such as the ability that'll provide you with a shield that lasts until you take damage, or the one that makes vines pop up on either side of you that can fuck up pretty much anything that gets caught. But again, this was at the very end of the game, so you don't even really get to play around with them too much. It's not the biggest deal in retrospect, but I'd have appreciated it if the abilities were a little more consistently useful. The actual combat itself was pretty fun. As I mentioned before, all the enemies have pretty solid animation going on, and they all have noticeable tells before they do their various attacks, with bosses being a prime example. After a while, you'll start to learn each enemy's attack patterns, and the difficulty will all be in the execution and in trying to deal with multiple enemies simultaneously. I ultimately found that fighting the trash mobs was engaging from start to finish. The boss encounters were also a lot of fun, though I'd say they were a little easy for my tastes. I was able to kill most of the bosses on the first try, and more often than not, the ones that gave me trouble were the ones where I went in without being fully stocked with healing items. The exception is the final boss, who was very fucking hard. It took me multiple attempts even with my healing items maxed out and with every stat upgrade in the game. I really enjoyed it, but it was such a massive spike in difficulty that it kinda threw me off. Still, all the bosses were well designed, and even when they were tricky, they definitely all made sense, and I think someone who's a bit less of a masochist than me would really enjoy them. The one thing I will say is that I noticed that the bosses are an absolute sack of hit points. They can take a serious amount of punishment. On the one hand, this is good because you actually have to learn them rather than succeeding by brute force, but there were times where it felt downright tedious. It's the kind of thing that I don't think developers should rely on too heavily, and the bosses in Fearmonium felt very tanky even by boss standards. The game also features a few different types of currency that you can collect. The primary currency is balloons. There are pickups scattered around, and enemies have a pretty high chance of dropping balloons. If you kill an enemy with an ability, it actually has a chance to triple its balloon drop, which is kinda neat. Balloons are used to purchase pretty much everything from healing items at Lady Depression, to restocking your abilities, to hints as to where to go next, which gets really expensive really fast, by the way. You can also reduce the stamina cost of your various abilities with balloons, with the max stamina reduction costing a total of 900 balloons per ability, which is definitely a lot, especially if you're going for that fucking achievement to max out all your ability upgrades. That's a lot of grind, and I'm not sure if I'll ever actually go back and get it. I found myself in a very weird place with the balloons. For most of the game, I felt like I was sitting on a huge pile of them, to the point where I just wouldn't care about getting more. but whenever I would need to buy some shit, I suddenly wouldn't have enough, which was rough at times. I mean, towards the end I had to run around and grind a bit just so I could buy up the surprisingly expensive healing items for the final boss because I was not going in without them. And then of course I mentioned how expensive the upgrades are. Ultimately, I like how it offers continual progress throughout the game, but it really becomes a negative when you need more balloons. I think a late game way to farm balloons would have been a welcome change, because at that point they've already done their job of giving you a continuing motivator throughout your experience. You can also collect another item. I'm just gonna call them energy. They have an actual name, but it's medical terminology, and I really don't feel like typing it out multiple times in my script only to probably mispronounce it in the recording and fuck up a bunch of takes because of it. This is used at the Sadness NPC. You get energy uncommonly from defeated enemies and you use them to unlock your second and third slots for passive effects. Afterwards, you can trade them for extra balloons. Pretty simple stuff, and I found myself unlocking the third passive slot right around the end of the game, which was pretty much perfect timing. It wasn't the most engaging system ever, but it was decent enough, and I'm glad I didn't have to hardcore grind to get that final passive slot. There are also hidden mask collectibles scattered throughout the game. These are generally very tough to find, oftentimes hiding behind fake walls or in areas that seem inaccessible at a glance. Usually there's some kind of hint, such as a sign pointing at what appears to be a wall, or the room's design looking like it leads to a non-existent path. There were some spots that really didn't make sense to me, but I might have just been missing something. They're very tough to find, until you get the upgrade to one of your passive abilities that alerts you when you're near a mask, which makes them absolutely trivial to find. As a reward, you get a pretty damn useful passive ability that I found incredibly useful in most of the boss fights after I unlocked it, though I actually swapped it out for the final fight. I do like how you have the option of not equipping the passive that points you to the masks if you want to search them out for yourself. Still, I found them kind of underwhelming overall. So overall, on a gameplay level, I had a good time with Fearmonium. The gameplay was engaging, and I'd definitely call it good, though it doesn't quite reach the levels of some of my favorites. I personally spent just under 15 hours in-game, and I think that was just about the right amount for me. Even though I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, it plays pretty damn well for a game designed and coded by a single guy. I liked it. So in conclusion, what do I think? Fearmonium is definitely a fun game, and it can't be denied that it's visually stunning. The story is good, with some pacing issues toward the end, and I feel like while the game executes what it wants to do well enough, it really doesn't innovate or push the genre forward at all. A fun experience, though I think if I ever do go back to the game, it'll be for the aesthetics rather than the gameplay. So if you watched any of my reviews, you'll know that I hate traditional review scores. I don't think they do a damn bit of good, so I'm going to answer the question that's really on your mind. Is Fearmonium worth your money? Fearmonium is available on Steam for $12.99 US or your regional equivalent. Now I have to say that price point kind of surprised me. I initially couldn't find any pricing info, so I asked Slava Grease via email and was expecting an answer of $20 to $25. The $12.99 figure is actually pretty damn cheap for a game of this type, and I think that has to be noted. At that price point, even though Fearmonium isn't perfect by any means, I'd say it's well worth your money. Go check it out. Link to the Steam page is in the description. Thanks again, Slava, for the review copy. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. Follow me on Twitter at @adstweets for updates and memes, and come join my Discord server linked in the description. It's a good time. More long-form stuff is coming, including more entries in my Evolution series, so keep an eye out for that. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Play the electro swing.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more.